The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has pushed so many insane conspiracy theories, and many of his supporters love it. In fact, he has many supporters because he has promoted a lot of insane conspiracy theories. RawStory found at least 58 different conspiracy theories promoted by Donald Trump. They range on everything from, I don't know, immigration to President Obama's birthplace and birth certificate. And my use of the term promoting is important because when questioned directly, sometimes Trump will be vague about whether he personally believes it. He'll say, whoa, well, I heard this, or such and such said it, but I'm not saying I necessarily believe it. I'm going to give you some examples here. I'm merely skipping around. We can't do all 58. Take a look. Here's a list, and I will just go through some of these. Birtherism. Of course, Donald Trump for years suggested that President Obama fabricated his birth certificate in order to pretend to be eligible to run for president. Donald Trump embraced the far-right conspiracy that President Obama didn't even write his book, Dreams from My Father. He mentioned that in a 2012 Fox News appearance. He also offered $50 million to charity if President Obama would release his college records, arguing Obama came out of nowhere. No one at Columbia University has heard of President Obama. President Obama wears a secret Muslim ring. This is a conspiracy theory created, if I recall correctly, by WorldNet Daily's resident conspiracy theorist Jerome Corsi. He also suggested and implied that the 1993 death of Vince Foster, an aide to then President Bill Clinton, was very fishy. This is, of course, one of the most researched suicides in the last 30 years. And you'll remember that in at least 3 separate interviews during the 2016 race, he claimed that Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz's father, was involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which might strike you as odd. He also parroted a number of 9/11 related conspiracy theories, one that the attackers had girlfriends who fled to Saudi Arabia after the attacks, and also that there were thousands of Muslim Americans in New Jersey celebrating on 9/11. Of course, that's been widely debunked. He blames progressives because Christmas has disappeared. He says the entire boycotting of Starbucks because of their holiday red cups was part of the progressive move to eliminate Christmas. And he also has lied and said that President Obama manipulated immigration numbers. Of course, no evidence of that whatsoever. And then, Lewis, some common ones that we hear from many people. A presidential wannabe, Donald Trump, has claimed that the CDC was lying about Ebola, that vaccines cause autism, although he's since backed away from that climate change is a hoax, possibly invented by China, and a classic from Donald Trump, that the unemployment rate is really 42%, and that there is a massive, massive cover-up of that. We've delved into that in detail and totally debunked it. The sad thing, Lewis, and this is just a sampling of the 58 plus conspiracy theories that Donald Trump has promoted, I don't think it really matters. I don't believe that his supporters at this point would care if he said the moon landing was staged, because he is going well beyond that.
He's got the conspiracies that appeal to just about everyone, right? I mean, of 58 on that list, you might find a few that you might think, well, there might be something to that.
You think there's some conspiracy theories on that list that I like?
There might be.
Yeah.
And because some of them are way more outrageous than others. Some are pretty mild.
Did you find any you liked?
On this list that we showed here, no.
No,
there are
okay.
many more. But this is, I think, part of the whole entertainer Trump thing. When you say things like this, it gets you a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And that's what Trump is all about.
And for people who are wondering whether Trump actually believes this stuff or not, it actually doesn't matter, because whether Trump actually believes this stuff or is willing to promote this stuff for political gain, even if he doesn't believe it, both realities are pretty damning. I actually don't think it's relevant whether he believes it or not.
That is true.
It's almost worse if he doesn't.
Well, maybe. He's playing politics, and it's maybe I would say worse if he does believe all of these things, because that might mean that he's not an ass, but an ass who is completely crazy.
This is going to sound like a fake story, but it is all too real. I've been telling you about this Trump University case that's going on against Donald Trump. Trump had this thing called Trump University that by every indication was a total scam. Basically, it started as a free seminar, which was just a sales pitch for a $1,500 class, which was just a sales pitch for a $20,000 class, none of which really taught you anything of value. And the latest news is that the case is moving forward. Trump has tried to dismiss the entire thing, says it's bogus, says he could have settled, but he wants to win. But here's the best part now. Trump has been increasingly frequently suggesting that the judge in the case may be biased because he's, quote, Spanish or Hispanic, as Donald Trump eventually corrected himself. It turns out this is not only absurd, but untrue. The judge was born in Indiana and was actually threatened by Mexican cartels for prosecuting them. I'm speaking of Judge Gonzalo Curiel, who was born in 1953 in East Chicago, Indiana. He was a prosecutor from 89 to 2006, primarily working in narcotics enforcement. He was a state judge from 2006 until 2012. And at that point, President Obama nominated him to be a federal district court judge. He was reportedly targeted for assassination by members of a Mexican drug cartel when he was ultimately successful in prosecuting them. And Trump has gone after Curiel as a Mexican who's attacking Trump because of his ethnic heritage. A couple months ago at a rally in Bentonville, Arkansas, Trump wanted to basically minimize the entire case against Trump University. And he said, well, this judge has tremendous hostility against me because he's, quote, Spanish. Here's a quote from Trump. The judge should have thrown the case out on summary judgment. But because it was me and because there's a hostility towards me by the judge, tremendous hostility beyond belief, I believe he happens to be Spanish, which is fine. He's Hispanic, which is fine. And we haven't asked for a recusal, which we may do, but we have a judge who's very hostile. Can you imagine saying, we need a new judge because he's Hispanic? This is absurd.
Yeah, typical Trump rhetoric, tremendous hostility.
Yeah.
Throwing that word in every chance he
You
gets.
you can't make this stuff up.
No. And he's not really citing any reason why there's this hostility or proof of this hostility.
Well, you know why, Lewis? Because Hispanics incorrectly believe Trump is mean to them because he's going to build the wall, or most of them are rapists, although some, I'm sure, are probably good people. So then 2 days later, he goes on Fox News with Chris Wallace and he says the following. I think the judge has been extremely hostile to me. I think it has to do with the fact I'm very, very strong on the border, and he happens to be extremely hostile to me. We have a very hostile judge. He is Hispanic, and he is very hostile to me. And then last Friday, yeah, I know. Then last Friday, Trump spent 12 minutes during a campaign speech talking about Judge Curiel and this thinly veiled racist tirade against him. Recently, CNN's Jim Acosta asked Trump, why do you have to mention that he's Mexican? How is that relevant? And Trump said, because I'm a man of principle. People are being played for fools by this guy. Meanwhile, former Trump University workers are calling the school a lie and a scheme, including Ronald Schnackenberg, a former sales manager for the company, saying, I believe that Trump University was a fraudulent scheme. The position from some Trump advisors is Ronald Schnackenberg is suing Donald Trump. So, of course, he's going to say that. But it is not looking good, Lewis.
No. Any judge who wasn't paid off by Trump or something like that would realize that something very strange was going on with this Trump University stuff. This is just a way for Donald Trump to kind of deflect and make things not look so bad.
Well, the judge is Hispanic. I mean, there, you know.
So that must mean he's hostile. Tremendous hostility.
We'll take a break. Plenty more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Lawrence Green. Lawrence, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. I know that you probably never heard me mention this, but the program is viewer supported. So if you want to support the show, if you like the work we do, just a few pennies a day goes a long way, and you get a lot of great member benefits, including the members-only bonus show. Read all about it and sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Lots of people very excited, Lewis, for Hatriot Mail today. Take a listen to this.
Between waving a Gadsden's flag from a highway overpass to drafting George Zimmerman for a 2016 run,
Right.
a patriot has little time for anything else. But when that annoying little dweeb, David Pakman, really pushes the liberal envelope beyond what a God-fearing teabagger can bear, there's Hatriot Mail. Your brief respite from the unending deluge of liberal bias.
All right, it was only a matter of time until the Hatriots got a hold of the transgender bathroom issue, and that is indeed the subject matter today. I present to you a social commentary on the controversy over transgender bathrooms.
The rights of real women are completely disregarded once again by the misogynistic attitudes of delusional, mentally sick men. Not going to sit back and put up with this shit. If one of these freaks waltz into ladies' room when my daughters or myself are present, tranny man gotta get pumped full of lead.
Yeah, there's nothing more well-adjusted to concisely and soberly discuss the issue of transgender bathrooms than referring to tranny man.
Also, you'll notice that in the United States, this is how we solve our problems, right? By shooting people.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, this is really representative of the problem here, which is very quickly guns and shooting people come to people's minds as a possible solution to problems, which, by the way, don't exist. It's one thing to solve problems that exist with guns. It's a whole other problem to threaten solving problems that aren't even real with guns.
Yeah. David, I'm sure this is a perfectly responsible, level-headed gun owner, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, but perfectly I'm sure that they would never do any of these things that they're completely comfortable on the internet threatening to do. Okay, I'm often asked to announce positions that are available on the show, and that is what I am doing today. We have a new position that is available. We are going to go through the normal hiring process using job search sites, etc. But why not open it to the audience, right? People who already know the show. So we have a show producer position that we are now listing. The position is physically located in the Boston area. It would start around August 1st. The position will be at minimum heavy part-time or possibly full-time for the right person. It involves a combination of disciplines and areas: audio and video editing, show research, production, graphic design, etc. And there's always on-air opportunities here, Lewis. I mean, this is when isn't there an opportunity to be on the air on the David Pakman Show?
We have cameras and microphones.
That's exactly right.
We plan on using them.
Might as well use them. So the ideal candidates will have many of the following skills: video editing, ideally Adobe Premiere; New Tech TriCaster multi-camera editing skills. If anybody knows anything about TriCasters, that's a really good skill to have. Audio editing. That's an inside joke, which we should tell, by the way, at some point, Lewis, on the bonus show, maybe.
Agree. That's a good one. Yeah.
Audio editing skills. Lighting skills, skills working with sound equipment and microphones, basic IT networking skills. If you can do graphic design, that is absolutely fantastic, and do graphics for the show. Writing, producing, hosting type skills, either in front of the camera or at minimum in front of a microphone. Not all of these are required, but the more you have, the better prepared you would be. How do you apply for this job? That's sort of the key question. Send a
Carrier
resume.
pigeon.
Carrier pigeon is one possibility. I prefer send a resume, a letter of interest, sort of outlining your background and why you'd be interested in working for the show. And ideally, you would have these samples of the work you've done to david@davidpakman.com. And remember, Pakman is Pakman. It will not get to me if you spell my last name in any other way. Very, very exciting. The David Pakman Show is hiring. This is part of the Boston expansion we've been talking about. I anticipate a good amount of interest, and what could possibly be more exciting than hiring a qualified and competent candidate from our own audience. So get in touch, resume, cover letter, and work samples to david@davidpakman.com. After the break, we are going to have a fantastic conversation with economist Richard Wolff. I think you're really going to like this one. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome economist Richard Wolff back to the program. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts. He was actually my Econ 104 professor back in, I guess it must have been 2002 or 2003. The new book is Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown 2010 to 2014. There's so much material in this book, and I thought to sort of get us into the conversation, there's a few things I want to focus on. Recently, part of the problem that I've experienced in thinking about the failings and successes of capitalism is that the mere mention of the topic is almost instantly derailed by many with these manichaeistic discussions of, well, are you a communist? Is that what you mean when you say, let's explore the failings of capitalism? Is this particularly problematic now, or has this always been a challenge when we want to sort of discuss capitalism?
Well, it comes and goes, David. The truth of it is, there have always been critics of capitalism. Indeed, it's not even fair to capitalism to pick out capitalism itself. There have been critics of slavery when it was the dominant system. There were critics of feudalism when it was the dominant system. The history of the human race, not surprisingly, finds that whatever the economic system you have, there are people who love it, people who hate it, and all kinds of people in between. And indeed, it would be an unhealthy society if everybody loved it without criticism, or everybody hated it. Indeed, if everybody felt that way, the system wouldn't last very long, to say the least. So I think it's a good sign that societies in general have people who are differing in their opinions. The critics have a very special function, which is to point out what's not working well, because if you don't have that, then you don't fix the problems, and then they only get worse. It's a little bit like dealing with problems in your physical health or your mental health. They tend to be better handled if you face up to them rather sooner than later and deal with them. So I would say that capitalism has always had its critics. It's always had its defenders. And sometimes the two sides kind of get a little lopsided and go over the top. And what you point to is one way that the defenders have done that, by attacking critics as if to be critical of capitalism is tantamount or equal to being a particular devotee of one or another system, being a devotee of something evil or bad or dangerous. Particularly after the end of World War II, when we had our big anti-communist turn in the United States, the McCarthy era, all of that, it became for quite some decades virtually impossible to be a critic of capitalism because you were immediately attacked for being somehow an advocate of our great enemy, the Soviet Union, or communism, or some awful stereotype about what communism might be. I'm very happy to say that that's fading now, that we are in a time when, in part because the Soviet Union isn't there anymore, and because of changes in the People's Republic of China, the whole notion of the great enmity between capitalism and socialism is really much reduced, and it's possible to discuss these issues without the hysteria that attended it, say, from 1945 to the year 2000. And I think you can see it most obviously in the fact that Bernie Sanders, who accepts the label socialist, is not only able to run for the presidency, but to do far, far better than anyone, by the way, himself included, had any reason to foresee as little as a year ago. So I think we're becoming a healthy society, able and willing to let the debate, which should have been there all along anyway, let that debate restart itself. What is good and bad about capitalism? What needs to be fixed? Ought we to be thinking about doing better than capitalism? These are healthy debates. They should be going on. And I'm happy to say we seem to be at a moment in our history when we're going in precisely that direction.
Along these lines, you have an essay in the new book, Capitalism's Ideological Crutches. And oftentimes, what we see is the sort of public expression in favor or against a particular policy is not, it's a sort of a sign of what are the underlying ideologies that someone may support or oppose. You know, a good example is when we talk to people who are against abortion and against access to birth control, when I explain, well, you know, actually access to birth control reduces abortion, it doesn't matter because the underlying ideology is sort of what I call strict father morality, which is if you do the wrong thing, which is, you know, what have sex outside of marriage or whatever the case may be, you sort of deserve to be pregnant and should be forced to carry the child to term, right? There's an underlying ideology that makes the specifics sort of irrelevant when you are confronted with them. What are the underlying ideological crutches that capitalism is based on if you believe that it is the best system?
Well, I think one of the fundamental notions is that human beings are innately individualistic, that they care mostly about themselves, that they look at other people as instrumental means to get more or better for yourself. Greediness is somehow inherent in the human makeup, and that capitalism is a way of harnessing, controlling these basic human qualities in such a way that we get the best possible outcome. It's the implicit notion is the alternative is for a powerful government to control us, to keep us from being too mean-spirited, too individualistic, too self-centered. But then again, that carries the danger of what that government will do and what the individuals who control it will do, so that capitalism becomes in some way the best framework for harnessing a human nature that isn't looked at in very positive ways. And somehow capitalism then gets the credit for making us more productive with one another, given our awful natures, than we would otherwise be able to be.
What's interesting to me about that is some of the traits you listed at the beginning, beliefs about humans, human traits, some of those are at least partially true. I mean, certainly when you compare humans to bees, for example, the sense of individualism and the sense of greed and how one fits into the bigger picture. I mean, there's no doubt that to some extent, I think those traits do exist in humans. But in my mind, those would be reasons to have a system that maybe would counterbalance those instincts rather than feed into them.
Not only that, I think most modern psychology teaches that most of us have in us what would be called contradictory impulses, desires, needs. Yes, there's a part of us that is individualistic and selfish and all of that. But there are likewise, and it's not so hard to find endless examples of us as cooperating human beings, as motivated by feelings of love, of solidarity, of empathy, and all of that. And that perhaps you might want to say that we have the capacity to go in a variety of different directions. And as many critics of capitalism have pointed out, the fundamental flaw in their minds with capitalism is it goes way further than we ought to reward and encourage those parts of the human being that are selfish, are greedy, and then justifies itself as if it wasn't encouraging them, but simply managing what is an inherent part of the human condition. And so I think, and I am myself a critic, I don't pretend to be otherwise, that capitalism bears no small part of the responsibility for those very attributes of the human being that they then turn around and claim they are only accommodating, when in fact I think they exaggerate and underscore them. And I think at least we ought to give a try to alternative systems in a very experimental way to see whether and how they can do better.
There are some who would sort of accept the majority of that argument about the ideological crutches of capitalism, and they may take what they believe to be a higher level view, which is, yeah, you're probably right that this is a system that is encouraging or nurturing some of those instincts which exist to varying degrees in humans. But the thing is, it's the most efficient system, that it's the organization of our economy and society that is most efficient. But that's really not true, is it?
No, and I think there are two ways to show that it's not true. One is historical. It is easy to show that for much of the history of slavery in the centuries that it existed, likewise for much of the history of feudalism that existed in Europe, for example, in the 1,000 years before capitalism became the system, that there were countless numbers of people who said exactly the same things about those systems, that slavery is the most efficient way to get things done, that human beings naturally, or if you're religious, by virtue of God's will, fall into two categories, masters and slaves. And by organizing slavery, you get the slaves to do a lot of work, which could only be organized by the masters who have that capacity, and that's the most efficient system.
And this is also present in older caste systems. Is that not right?
Absolutely. In other words, a standard defense of the status quo throughout human history has been the claim that it's the most efficient thing that has ever existed up until that moment. And then as the enthusiasm bubbles over, it becomes the most efficient thing that could ever be, past, present, or future. So we shouldn't be surprised that there are people in a capitalist system of the sort we have in the world today who have found their way to the same formulation. We are the most efficient that has ever been, and that bubbles over into we are the most efficient that can ever be. And my point is simply, it was always false before. How in the world should we be expected to believe that suddenly, this time, it's correct? But there's a more profound criticism. The very notion of efficiency is fundamentally flawed and absurd. Let me briefly explain. Economists, of which I'm one, do a kind of assessment of anything that happens in the past, in the present. Let me give you a concrete example. A hospital is trying to figure out whether they ought to build another wing for certain kinds of illnesses. And they call in economists to do what's called a cost-benefit analysis, to assess what are all the costs of building a new wing on the one hand, and what are all the benefits of building a new wing on the other, to measure each of them once you know what they all are, and then if the benefits add up to more than the costs, why then you go ahead and do it because it is an efficient thing to do. And if in fact the costs outweigh the benefits, you don't do it because it isn't efficient. This is a lovely fable, this kind of story I've just told, but let me tell you why it's a fable. And it's simple. No one knows, no one can know what all the consequences of any act are. Whether you build a wing of the hospital, or you raise an interest rate, or you lower a tax level, whatever economic event you want to point to, the task of identifying all of the positive consequences and all of the negative ones is in principle impossible to do. One of the simplest reasons, because many of the effects won't happen until next year, or 3 years from now, or 10 years from now. And unless human beings have acquired capabilities no one has ever seen, we don't know what's going to happen 2, 5, 10 years from now.
Yeah, but there is a
and
counterpoint to that,
therefore,
isn't there? There is sort of a counterpoint to that, which is fine. We can't possibly to a 100% certainty measure all of the impacts 50 years out, but over time we get better at getting to 95%, and maybe that's good enough. Not that that justifies the system, to be clear, but at least to say we're good enough at assessing what the consequences would be. I mean, maybe the standard is too high if you say we have to be able to, beyond any doubt, ascertain 100% of the consequences.
No, unfortunately, I wish it were as easy to resolve as that, but it isn't. Let me explain why.
Yeah.
We don't know what the variables are and how they will change. You only know that you're getting 95% if those that you're not getting can be somehow thought to be only 5% of what you would otherwise know. But you never know that. You never know whether the results of something you're contemplating that won't happen for the future will be the very big ones that make everything go, oh, we shouldn't do it,
Sure.
or will be a very small one. There's no way to know that, because in order for you to know what you're not measuring and that it's small, you have to know all of it to know that they're the small ones. You can't do that beforehand. But let me finish. There's even another way.
Yeah.
When we say we look at the consequences of something, like building a new wing, and let's say one of the consequences we find is such and such a traffic pattern will have to be rerouted where this wing of the hospital is built, and that will cause more traffic jams and maybe even more accidents, and we have to figure that in. Here's the problem. Those things I just referred to as consequences of building the hospital's new wing are never, let me underscore that, never just the consequences of that. In other words, what happens to traffic in that area will also be affected to what is happening to the construction of automobiles, of tires, of the materials used in the street, of lighting patterns on city streets at night, of the you can figure it out. It's a million factors, so that you can't even know when you measure a quote effect of what you're looking at, that it's the effect just of that, which makes the whole exercise of identifying and measuring absurd. You can't do it. No one has ever, it's nothing we should feel bad about. We can't do that kind of thing. It's a bit magical. You know, when we read as children Superman comics, and there's this lovely fellow who does good by flying around the community, we kind of understand, A, that nobody can do that, we can't do that, but we enjoy the fantasy. Well, efficiency is the same thing. We can't know the consequences of what we do. We never could, and that gives us a certain sense of weakness, of smallness, of insecurity about our decisions, all of which is understandable. But then we make magic. Suddenly, out of our insecurity about our decisions and the inherent unknowability of their consequences, we have magically created the notion, oh boy, we can do the undoable. We can actually find out what the consequences are, measure them, and only do those that work out nicely. It's a fantasy. It's never been doable. For every example you could find where somebody said X would happen in the future, and therefore this is good to do, I can find you one where the exact same calculations were made and the end result was completely different from what had been foreseen. And I think, therefore, this notion of efficiency ought to be demoted from this magical role it plays in our society. You know, the real truth of it is, and I've been in these scenes many times in my life, to stay with my example, the hospital wants to build a wing, But let's say that requires destroying a bunch of homes and wrecking a particular neighborhood. Not surprisingly, the people who live there don't want this, and they say don't do it. But let's say the hospital is all for it. They want to do it. Okay, now there's a public hearing by some city agency. Should we or should we not issue the licenses to enable the hospital to build the wing? And in come the paid economists like me for the hospital telling everybody why it's efficient to do it. Here come the people in the neighborhood who don't have the money, who don't have the connections, and maybe they get a volunteer economist like me to come in and do as best he can with his free time and no budget. Well, guess what? Each side says what they think the efficiencies are, but the ones with the bells and whistles and the beautiful charts and all the right press credentials will win the case. But believe me, it has nothing to do with efficiency. It has to do with who brings the bigger gun to the gunfight,
right.
And that's the one who wins.
Well, you're channeling our friend Donald Rumsfeld. Those unknown unknowns are really the key to this whole thing. The book is fantastic. We're talking about economist Richard Wolff's book, Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. Dozens of topics like these in the book. Thanks as always for joining me.
Thank you, David, and I look forward to talking with you again in the future.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
In a stunning escalation of the seemingly mutual fandom between Donald Trump and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-Un, both sporting interesting haircuts in this picture that we're using, North Korean state media has praised Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump as a far-sighted and wise politician. Now, by far-sighted, I assume they don't mean he needs reading glasses. I assume that he means that he sees into the future. Let me first remind you of Donald Trump's comments about North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un not that long ago.
But if you look at North Korea, he's like a maniac. Okay? And you got to give him credit.
Yeah.
How many young guys, he was like 26 or 25 when his father died, take over these tough generals, and all of a sudden, it's pretty amazing when you think of it. How does he do that? Even though it is a culture and it's a cultural thing, he goes in, he takes over, and he's the boss. It's incredible. He wiped out the uncle, he wiped out this one, that one. I mean, this guy doesn't play games.
Yeah, truly, truly amazing. So according to NK News, yesterday, an editorial in the state news outlet DPRK Today said there are many positive aspects to Donald Trump's inflammatory policies, like his proposals to stay out of the conflict between North and South Korea. The piece referred to Trump's comments 2 months ago about withdrawing U.S. troops from South Korea if the country doesn't increase its spending to help alleviate the cost of housing troops. The editorial is not an endorsement, Lewis, from the North Korean government, but when you have a totalitarian government controlling the press completely, it's certainly worth something.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch these two kind of throw bouquets at each other. It's no surprise that these comments are coming out. I mean, Kim Jong-un does not want the United States involved with anything. Donald Trump is this quasi-isolationist, and he supports that, so it makes sense.
The other country that seems to like Trump to some degree is Russia. I mean, Russian media has praised Trump. Vladimir Putin has made statements about Trump.
Putin also seems to be a little too friendly with North Korea.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So far, the people from the U.S. that North Korea has expressed positivity towards are Donald Trump and Dennis Rodman, who went to North Korea and defecated and vomited in one of their hotels. Who could possibly write this stuff? The two people that North Korea has generally been positive about have been Dennis Rodman and Donald Trump.
That was a hallway.
Hallway, yeah. I mean, he would never do that in a room, Lewis. Obviously, he went into the hallway to defecate and vomit.
Well, after Trump becomes president, perhaps Dennis Rodman will be appointed as the
first North Korean ambassador for the United States in a very long time, yeah.
Yes, no doubt. And this will be the beginning of a new friendship between Trump, Kim Jong-un, and Putin. It'll be a great allegiance.
Let me tell you about depravity, which I know is a pretty common theme on this program. We've been talking for years about cutting defense spending, reining in the military-industrial complex, closing some bases. Do we really need 50 military bases in Germany, or might the U.S. be safe with 25 American military bases in Germany? Why do we need to constantly build and replace countless weapons and missiles and rockets? Or could we maybe pare that down a little bit? This morning, I was initially thrilled to see that the Senate is finally going to take a serious look at cutting defense spending. How are they going to do it, Lewis? By cutting back on housing benefits for members of the military, potentially cutting their benefits by hundreds of dollars per month. There's this housing benefit, which is meant to help service members cope with the reality that they often move very frequently. This often means that their significant other can't really have a job. They only have for those who are in a marriage or partnership, they only have one income coming in, and spouses are often forced to really not work because they're just not in one place long enough to have any real significant job. But now the Senate version of the NDAA includes this provision that would get rid of an extra stipend for service members. The committee is viewing the housing benefit as a sort of windfall that's exploited by service members. They want to eliminate this stipend, which is actually a really important piece of compensation. If you're a sergeant in the Army, right? If you have 4 years of military experience, or if you came in at a higher rank because of an associate's or bachelor's degree, you would earn $31,000 a year from basic pay, right? 4 years of military experience, or you come in with a bachelor's degree. If you're looking for housing on a $31,000 a year salary, just a few $100s a month, Lewis, can make a really big difference in the affordability of an apartment. This is no small thing. This really affects people who supposedly are supposed to be focused on defending our country, not worried about whether they can make their rent payments.
Yeah, this seems to be where the cuts are happening. That and the care that veterans receive when they come back from tours of duty.
Yeah, support the troops.
Yeah, so this is what's called supporting the troops, right? Yeah.
As lawmakers are looking at troop compensation, we have hugely expensive and ineffective weapons programs. We have the U.S. spending more on defense than the next 6 countries in the world combined. ProPublica did an analysis which says that wasteful expenditures just related to Afghanistan are $17 billion, which is higher than the GDP of 80 different countries around the world. And a Politico report on the Pentagon's $44 billion Defense Logistics Agency says that $7 billion was spent on flat out unneeded equipment. The Pentagon didn't even want the equipment, and we still spent money on it.
Yep. We've covered multiple stories of billion-dollar mess-ups, billion-dollar different situations where that money was just completely wasted.
Yeah.
And it's happening all the time. And just imagine how many things are in the works right now. The billions just keep adding up.
There are so many places where we can cut military spending that doesn't cut benefits or pay for our troops. And it's actually wasteful spending. ProPublica, Politico, so many studies have looked into this and identified billions and billions of dollars that could be cut. But yet again, we're looking at hurting the troops. And when it comes to healthcare after they come back from combat, we've talked about that. It's great if you put one of those yellow ribbons on your car for supporting the troops. But if you're supporting elected officials who are looking to do this, that's not really supportive of the troops. And sadly, there are a lot of people, a lot of elected officials, Lewis, who look in this direction rather than maybe we need only a few bases around the world in some of these countries instead of 50 like we have in Germany. More at this point, it's probably more than 50.
Yeah, and I don't know why even Democratic presidents, many Democratic congressmen refuse to even talk about it as well. I mean,
well, some of them do.
It's not enough. They
More members of the House than the Senate, though. You're right about that.
I mean, is just the military-industrial complex too powerful? Are there lobbying efforts too great?
They fund people on both sides of the aisle. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's it. Maybe
yeah,
that's
but
the
Lewis,
easy answer.
we hear from them. None of their decisions are influenced by all the money they get from companies. You know that.
Just about every decision made in Congress is influenced by money.
We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call anytime. Here's a really specific question I want to address. It's been coming up a lot.
Hey David, I am Jason calling from Manitoba with a question about Citizens United. I heard that it opens the floodgates, of course, to all sorts of political money, but I'm wondering if there is a limitation to out-of-country donators, not only to corporations, but say people that want to give smaller ones to someone like Bernie.
Right. Well, listen, as the law is written, foreigners are not allowed to donate to American elections. Although if you are in the U.S. with a green card, although you cannot vote, you can donate. So no, you are not allowed. Foreigners are not allowed to make even small donations to political campaigns based on my FEC research as of this morning. That's almost the end of today's show, but there's a whole other show called The Bonus Show for our subscribers at davidpakman.com/membership. Today, we will talk about 32 hours of reading fine print. What is that about? We will talk about a North Korean Facebook clone, and Lewis has a story for us about a clever beer smuggling product. I think you're going to like this. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Don't miss it. It's super easy. Get instant access by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.